All right, so here we go with our second lecture, video lecture, second part for chapter number 16. We're looking at the Americas, and now we're going to look at the conquest of the Americas, or the New World. So, here we see a famous picture of a painting of Columbus arriving to the New World. Of course, you can see that they're not only flying the Spanish flag, but also they're displaying the Christian cross, because remember, these people are looking to convert people, not just in addition to conquer people. Now, the first kind of like victims of this conquest was a group of Indians known as the Taino Indians, and they were the native people that lived in the different islands of the Caribbean. And of course, the vast majority of them would die from disease, particularly smallpox. But then those who survived would be forced into labor camps that became known as Encomiendas. So the Tainos, that's why there's not any native, people who are from the Caribbean. There are no native ancestry there, because all the natives were essentially wiped out, which isn't the same like with Mexico and Peru and other parts of South America. Now, one of the kind of strange or unique things about the Tainos is the way of they cooked these grilling sticks that they will call barbacoa, and of course that is where barbecue comes from. So again, these are the different islands of the Caribbean, and all of these places where the Tainos lived and the Spanish were eventually conquered. Now, the Caribbean is going to be home to many different plantations, particularly producing sugar, which is the #1 cash crop, and tobacco as the #2. And the Europeans are going to build these plantations in order to grow them as cash crops. Now, once the Spanish settle and control these little islands all over the Caribbean, they're going to start launching expeditions into North America, like Florida, into Mexico, like where the Aztecs would be, and also into South America, where the Incas would be in Peru. And this is where we get the phrase conquistadores, right? These are the conquerors of the American, empires, the Aztecs and the Incas. And these are the two main guys who are given credit for conquering: Hernando Cortez and Francisco Pizarro. Now, as you should already know, that the reason why these two civilizations, these two empires collapsed, the #1 reason was disease. But on top of that, the Spanish also gained a lot of allies, because the neighboring people around the Aztecs or around the Incas were looking to rebel, and they allied themselves with the Spanish. Now, we can't dismiss the fact that the Europeans also had superior military technology, and not just gunpowder, but metal, iron and steel weapons and armor and horses also gave them a big advantage. Now, at the same time, the Spanish are going through the Caribbean and through Mexico and through Peru. We see that the Portuguese are going to make their way into Brazil. So how was this formed? Why is it that most of Latin America speaks Spanish except Brazil? And the reason is because there was a treaty between Spain and Portugal called the Treaty of Tordesillas. Not tortillas, Meredith, Tordesillas. And Tordesillas divided, it was the Pope basically was like the negotiator, and the Pope got involved, and the Pope said, okay, we're going to draw a line, and everything on one side, the west side, will belong to Spain, and everything on the east will belong to Portugal. And if you look at the map where the line falls, it's called the line of demarcation. Clearly, Spain got the better part of the deal, although Portugal did get to claim a whole bunch of parts of Africa and Asia. But Brazil falls on the Portuguese side, and therefore Portugal would become the rulers of Brazil. And why would the Pope get involved in this? Why get involved between the Spanish and the Portuguese? Was because these were Catholic countries, and he didn't want these two countries, who are also competitors, to go to war against each other. So what are the Portuguese going to be doing in Brazil? Well, they're going to bring plantations to Brazil. Sugar plantations, the main one. And in fact, they are so productive that the term for these plantations is engeno, which is Portuguese literally for engine, because these were like little engines that could produce a whole bunch of stuff. And how did they produce a whole bunch of stuff? Well, through slave labor. Now, who owned these? Rich people, right? The aristocracy owned these. The Portuguese nobility owned these. So you're not going to see like merchants coming in and like, investing money and doing a joint stock company, which is what the Dutch or the English would have done. These lands belong to the British government, the Portuguese government, and the Portuguese government gave these land grants to the aristocrats, and they brought in their slaves, and they started producing sugar and became super, super, super wealthy. So why bring in slaves? Well, the Portuguese didn't want to do it because sugar cultivation is extremely difficult, especially in the tropical climate of Brazil. So at first they used Indians, but as we know, most of the Indian population, the indigenous population of the Americas, will die from disease. Those who were forced to work didn't last too long because these were horrific working conditions. So many of them would run away into the jungle, into the wilds of Brazil. So therefore they started bringing African slaves. All right, and these African slaves will also die from the horrible working conditions, but they were less likely to run away because where are they going to run to? Not like they could run back home to Africa. So Brazil will have the largest concentration of slaves. That means that a big chunk of the population of Brazil was of African ancestry. And in fact, slavery was such a major part of not only the Brazilian economy, but also Brazilian culture and society, that Brazil will be the very last country in Latin America, or in the Americas, North and South, to abolish slavery. They're going to abolish it all the way in 1888, right? That's about 120 years ago. All right. Let's talk about administration next. So the Spanish, they conquer these territories, and then now they have to operate them. They have to run them. They have to administer them. But they live hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away across the Atlantic Ocean. So how do you do this? Remember, this is before you can, email and send text messages across the world instantaneously. So any type of communication network across the Atlantic will take months and months to go from Europe to the Americas. So what they did is that the Spanish monarchies had an indirect administration. They were still in charge and they collected taxes and passed laws, but the Spanish monarchs living in Spain, they would send a governor which had the title of viceroy, and these viceroys were hand selected. They were loyal to the crown, to the king and the queen, and they would act, they would rule the territory, whether it was New Granada or New Mexico or New whatever, or New Spain, I should say. And these different territories, these different, administrative regions in South America were ruled by these viceroys, and these viceroys pretty much could do whatever they want. However, to make sure that these viceroys remained loyal and didn't grow corrupt or didn't try to do anything stupid, the Spanish monarchs also set up what are called audiencias, and these were town councils, basically city officials in a way, and they kind of served to like balance and check the power of the viceroy, to make sure that the viceroy again wasn't doing anything out of his limits. And most of these individuals, whether it's the audiencia people or the viceroys, of course, they're going to live in the major cities, in the capitals. So we're looking at Lima in Peru, and we're looking at Mexico City in Mexico. So if you lived on the countryside, chances are if you're Spanish, you can do whatever you want because you were in charge, basically. Now, the Spanish Empire, right, their colonial possessions, was one of the largest in all of world history. And they ruled territories from North America, places like Florida and California and Texas, throughout Mesoamerica, all the Caribbean, and most of South America, with the exception, of course, Brazil. Now, the Indians who were ruled, who were conquered, right, they constantly rebelled against the Spanish authorities. They constantly fought and revolted. And even though they gained some successes and had some type of revenge here and there, the end result is that the Spanish were always able to defeat them. Again, these Indians, these indigenous people, lacked the military technology to put up a fight. So what's going to happen to the Indians who are under Spanish rule? They're going to be forced to work, right? What is called coerced labor. That means forced labor. Now, we see two systems set up. The first one is the mita system. Now, the mita system should ring a bell, because the mita system is not a Spanish invention. In fact, it is a Inca invention. Remember, the Inca used the mita system to force their subjects to work on public construction, that is, building of roads, building of bridges, farming state-owned lands, and so instead of paying taxes, this is the way that the government got people to work for the government, right? Work for the state. So every few weeks out of the year, you had to work free, of course, for the government. Now, when the Spanish come in, right, they see this kind of like set up already. They see that the Inca's been using this system. They see how the Inca subjects follow the orders and do whatever it is their authorities tell them. So they just kind of come in, they push the Inca empire out of the way and establish themselves as the leaders of this new empire, right? So the Spanish just kind of like replaced the Incas with themselves, and therefore they continue to use the mita system, right? But here's the big kind of like messed up thing. Instead of working on projects like roads and food and stuff like that have more of a public benefit that benefits everyone, they were forcing the Indians to work in silver mines, especially this big silver mine called Potosi, and nowadays it's in Bolivia, but it was part of the Inca Empire and therefore part of the Spanish colony. And Potosi was a mountain that was filled with silver. And the Spanish would force the Indians to work there, and these were dangerous conditions. And so the mita system is one of those labor systems that we saw. And again, the mita system is not a new idea. The Incas had it, but now the Spanish are taking it over. Now, in other parts of the colonies, the Spanish would use what we call haciendas. And haciendas is a fancy name for plantations, and like how the Romans would call it latifundios, or the Spanish called it haciendas. And in haciendas, plantations, we would see the encomienda system, right? And here's the encomienda system. So basically what happens, right? So we have all this new land that is easily available. It all belongs to the Spanish monarchs, right? So the Spanish monarchs are going to give land grants to their nobles and their conquistadors for, fighting and taking over. And once you become a landowner, you become an encomendero. That means you own the land and the people in it, right? The natives that live in that land belong to you. So this is kind of like feudalism. Remember how in European feudalism, the lords will control the land that is granted to them by the king, and all the serfs or peasants living on that land had to work for the lord? Same thing now is being used in the Americas. So these Indians, the indigenous people, had to work for the Spanish, right, through the encomienda system, and it was forced labor. So the Indians did not own the land that they worked on. It belonged to the encomenderos, and then the encomenderos would simply share or let the Indians keep a part of what they produced. But all the goods that was produced on the land officially belonged to the landowner. And then the landowner, of course, had to pay taxes to the Spanish crown. Now you got to ask yourself, oh man, why? Why would the Indians do this? Why would the Indians? What did the Indians get out of this system, right? Because they're kind of just forced to work. Well, the biggest selling or the biggest kind of like justification I should say. The biggest justification of the Encomienda system, because again, if you're an Indian, there's nothing you're gaining out of it, right? But if you're European, if you're Spanish, the justification is that the encomenderos are going to help civilize the Indians, because the Indians are not civilized because they're not Christians. So the encomendero is responsible for taking care of these poor, barbaric, savage, uncivilized Indians, turning them into good Christians, whether they want to or not. And then it's kind of like this father or parent-child relationship type of thing. So we see a lot of like racism here, where the Spanish Europeans view themselves as superior and their way of life as superior to that of the native populations, and therefore they take it upon themselves to help civilize and raise or take care of these poor, uncivilized Indians. Brazil and the Caribbean are, of course, going to be centers of sugar cultivation. Sugar is a very high in demand product. Remember, the Muslims were the first one to introduce sugar to the Mediterranean and therefore to Europe. And now the Europeans are in love with it, and the tropical climate of Brazil and the Caribbean is perfect for sugar cultivation, and that's where we see a lot of slaves coming in. All right, the silver trade. So like I mentioned, in Potosi, there was a mountain filled with silver. And all that silver went to Spain, kind of, sort of. So that what they would do is that they would get silver, they would mint it into coins, and these coins were called, what were they called? Something de ocho. I forgot. Anyways, so these are the coins, the Spanish coins, and it became kind of the first coin that was global, meaning that anywhere you went around the world, it was accepted, basically. Everyone knew about the Spanish coins. And so the Spanish would, use all this new wealth that they had, and they became the wealthiest country in Europe. They would hire soldiers to help them fight against other countries or help them conquer or maintain their territories. Spain would use all this money to maintain and control and expand their power. But they will also use their money for the silver trade, the Pacific silver trade. And what we see here is that from Potosi, which is somewhere around here in the corner, all that silver went to Lima. From Lima, it would be sent to Mexico. From Mexico, it would be sent to the Philippines, which was a Spanish territory, where they would trade for Chinese goods. What goods, you ask? Silk, spices, porcelain, and also tea. That's the new one. And then they will send all those products back across the Pacific to Mexico, and from here, they'll send them to Veracruz, and from Veracruz, sail across the Atlantic back home to Spain. All right, so the Europeans and the Spanish love their Chinese goods, and now they have the money to pay for it. And of course, the Chinese are like, gimme, 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 because the Chinese love their silver. So that is the silver trade. All right, so a lot of silver that came out of the Americas did not go back to Spain. It actually went to China. And the Chinese grew wealthy from all this, just as the Spanish grew wealthy from, stealing all this silver. All right, so we're going to stop here, I think. Yes, I think we're gonna have to stop here. It's way too long. All right, thanks for watching. I will talk to you next time about culture and religions and all the other messed up stuff. All right, that's it for part number 2.